Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam. Good morning. Welcome to the Java Cafe, Java fam.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Today is Tuesday, April 4th, 2023, and you are watching another episode of Your Healthy Java as we come every first and third Tuesday, thanks to the support from the Massachusetts General Hospital Office of Equity and Community Health. We bring you information about your health. We are your community health platform here for Your Healthy Java. Do me a favor, hit share this morning. We're kind of going to continue a conversation. It sort of popped up last week, last Thursday in our regular segment. There was reference to Jill Scott being in Boston, and somehow we got on the subject of the demonstration that she's known to do in her concerts. And so I remember asking a question, if you all were familiar with the demonstration, to put a symbol of a vegetable or something in the comments. And you all went in. I mean, in. But one of the comments that was made was keep your fruits and veggies wrapped and fresh. And so I'm going to kind of correlate that to today's subject. In all seriousness, April is STI, what we grew up knowing as STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. But as we learn more, they are actually infections. And so now in this space of health educators and medicine and doctors, the reference is STIs. And so we're going to talk about that this morning. We're going to talk about sexual health. Yes, it's Tuesday at 9 o'clock and, you know, the mothers may be in the room, but given some of y'all responses to some of topics, you know, we want to make sure that everybody is healthy from top to bottom. And so without further ado, I'd like to bring in a young man that I just got the honor of meeting a few minutes ago. Very personable and down to earth. He told me I can call him Wilfredo right off the bat, but I will start with, because you are a man of color and I love to celebrate the achievements that we make, and there's not that many of you in medicine. And so, you know, we want to make sure there is a lot, but we just want to honor that. So I'll start off with Dr. Matthias, and then we can go into Wilfredo, especially if you say something that resonates. But good morning, sir. Say good morning to the people, and we'll get into a little bit of who you are and then jump right in our topic today.
Love it. Thanks for the introduction, Jimmy. And yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm super happy to be here. I think you know, this is an exceptional and critical service that you're providing to the communities. It's really it's an honor to be here and to spend some time with you guys.
Absolutely. And so, because I'm familiar with medicine, I can, you know, ask what Dr. Matthias is in a department called infectious disease, otherwise known as, in the medical world, they'll say ID. And so tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and sort of your journey in how you got to infectious disease. And I don't know if you know, have a particular concentration or research in STIs, but just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know, going back to the very beginning, I guess I was born in the Dominican Republic, and we left when I was about 4 years old. And, you know, it was a classic immigrant story. It was parents essentially waking up one day and saying, like, you know, it's time to make the move to the US to, like, you know, build a better life and open the doors of opportunity for a kid. So we actually moved to New York City when I was 4 years old, and I grew up there for the most part. Hopped around a bit, spent some time in Queens, moved to Westchester. My folks currently live in the Bronx, and I initially, my higher education started when I went to New York University. You know, pretty early on, I had a sense I wanted to go into medicine. My family back in the Dominican Republic, actually, a lot of the folks there were physicians, so I kind of like grew up in that culture. So I prepped for that when I was at NYU in New York, and then afterwards, you know, I was applying to medical school, and you know, it's kind of like a dream come true. I ended up getting into Harvard Medical School, and I was like, okay, time to make the move up to Boston.
Where was
And
that from? From
what was
Boston
that?
to Boston, from where?
From New York, from New
Oh,
York. Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. You know, I've diehard New Yorker, but I was like, okay, we've got to make the move for this one, and I haven't left. I slowly grew to love this place, and that was back in 2011. I've been here for 12 years now, and the more time I spend here, the deeper I get and the happier I get. So yeah, so I went to medical school at Harvard, and then I trained at the Brigham in internal medicine. And you know, why ID? You know, incredibly long list. We could talk about this forever, but it's just this like awesome specialty in medicine where you get to kind of take care of the whole person from top to bottom, as opposed to just being focused on kind of like one organ system. So that was a big deal for me. And for a very long time, I've also been interested in working on essentially how we respond to epidemics, which, you know, nobody knew about until.
Kind of timely, sir.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, you know, you know, I was pretty into those like a long time ago, and then COVID put us on the map. So that's kind of my story. And you know, right now I spend my time split in, you know, kind of 2 to 3 different hats. So we take care of patients, and that's predominantly at Mass General. I also work at Brigham and Women's, where we see patients both who are hospitalized with infections in the hospital, and we also have a clinic where we see people who get referred to us, people, you know, who we care for longitudinally who have HIV. So I work on that. And many years ago, I began working for an organization that's Boston based. That's called Partners in Health.
Yes.
Yeah, so this was back in 2011. Um, when there was a large epidemic of cholera that began in Haiti. And that's kind of when I first started working in what we traditionally call global health.
Yep.
So I spent a lot of time traveling to Haiti working in that context, and kind of building a career in thinking about how we respond to epidemics, not just here in the US, but kind of across the world. So right now, I'm also based out of the MGH Center for Global Health. And a lot of the work that I do there is thinking about how we deliver care to patients with HIV. And a lot of that work actually happens back in the Dominican Republic. So I travel there often. And I'm also still very much involved with the work responding to cholera in Haiti, which is unfortunately now a pretty active issue once again.
It is amazing to hear, and I'd give you, you know, no disrespect there, but you look all of about good 28, 29, and so to hear that, you know, you've done so much and committed still to community locally and also globally. And I think it's important that we do have people from life experiences that can take that experience into medicine and just move toward equity. And that's one of the reasons we have this platform. I'll say to you that we did have Dr. Robbie from the Sexual Health Clinic last year, and we talked about HIV and AIDS, but we didn't talk about the generalization of STDs, STIs. We have some more seasoned folks, and so I'm going to help them transition between STDs and STIs. It's interesting. I'm going to ask you a question. What are STIs and STDs? Because we're not going to take for granted, sir,
Yeah.
that people know. And this, I think, is a part of the problem sometimes, that we make assumptions that people know things and they really don't. And then sometimes people aren't as comfortable saying. And so let's talk about sexual health, STIs, STDs. and give us sort of an overview of what are STIs and STDs. And I know you have to give some examples.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's a critical question, Jimmy, because there are people who spend their entire life essentially trying to advance the field of sexually transmitted infections, STIs. And there are even folks that focus just on like one of these particular infections. So just to kind of like lay the groundwork, because I'm sure we're gonna dive deeper into
Yep.
these separately going forward. But a sexually transmitted infection is an infection that is predominantly transmitted through sexual contact, essentially. It's as simple as that. They're not exclusively transmitted through sexual contact, and we can talk about that shortly, but it's infections that we can get through sex. There are a ton of them. There's some that we're all quite familiar with, like HIV, which is, the human immunodeficiency virus. There are certain bacteria that are transmitted through sex, gonorrhea, chlamydia, which, most people tend to be familiar with. And then there are like less common ones that we don't hear about often, but tend to cause issues. Things like mycoplasma genitalium, human papillomavirus,
Yep.
HPV is also a sexually transmitted infection. And so it's basically this very like broad bucket of many, many, many infections that are sexually transmitted. Why do we care about them? They cause a lot of issues, and they're readily transmittable because we're human and we have sex.
Yep.
And so some of them can be life-threatening. Some of them can cause all kinds of issues, ranging from infertility to other chronic diseases. And so they can be pretty impactful across the life course. So we like to identify them and treat them. And also, I think the part that for me is pretty important is that we've come a really long way. We have really sophisticated treatments that can do away with these things, and so it's something that I feel like we need to talk about more, because they're really readily addressable.
I want to, from your experience and where you're at now, from a trends perspective, I know you gave a general, and thank you for that. From your current work, research, or whatever, let's dive into maybe a couple of examples of STIs, what they can ultimately result in, if death is applicable to one that you pick. And then let's also talk about prevention and treatment in that vein as well. And so, based on your current work and what you're seeing, let's also factor in that in the pandemic, things got interesting in some relationship dynamics.
Yeah.
And we have to, and I don't know if you've seen or noticed, changes in things or whatever in the pandemic, quote unquote, post pandemic. But based on your work, let's talk about a couple of examples. You choose and pick one, and let's go over it.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So, big picture, and I think it's really great that we're talking about this now today. The trends are concerning. Like over the last several years, the evidence that we do have, which is predominantly from national data from the CDC, shows that STI rates are steadily increasing. And usually the three infections that they track, in addition to HIV, of course, are gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. And over the last several years, those have been going steadily up. Just as a very like concrete example, I think in 2021, syphilis rates went up by about 26% compared to prior statistics. And in that year, there were about like 2.5 million newly diagnosed cases of gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. And so it's a huge problem, and what the data is telling us is that it's getting worse. Why is a complex question. There are a lot of different reasons. But if you can imagine, especially over the last several years with the pandemic, lockdowns originally, people had less access to healthcare.
And prophylactics. Let's keep that 100.
Totally. I mean, it's like our entire healthcare system got diverted to managing COVID, and it became much harder for people to get the care that they needed. So inevitably, cases go up. Additionally, a lot of the public health infrastructure that we have to manage STIs at a public health level, a lot of those professionals got deployed to respond to the pandemic.
Yep.
Which to me, the fact that these cases were increasing because of that issue also tells me that this is kind of just the tip of the iceberg. Like, if people weren't going to care, if people were getting tested less, and yet we still see numbers increasing, I worry that these numbers
they're not real numbers. They're and that's the piece where the people will get either by a severe case and they just feel, I got to go to the hospital. Some people really just don't know, think it's an itch, think it's just whatever. I used to work with adolescents, and so, but we're not just going to pinpoint our young people. Some of our older heads, since I used to work in this field, and so since Viagra, HIV numbers have went up in elders and seniors, and so it is an issue. And I can really sense from you, because when you say certain things, your whole disposition like changes in the realization of what this can potentially do. And so you name the quote unquote like big three away from HIV, which is gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis. Those numbers are going up. Are you aware, or are there trends when it comes to Black and brown people and young people? And maybe if you know of some senior, numbers as well. From what your observation generally, what is the breakdown of where we're seeing this uptick?
Great question. It really touches a lot on the disparities in health that we're now like all too familiar with. Unfortunately, I mean, COVID just kind of really like laid this bare for everybody to see, and these disparities that we saw with COVID, like they apply across the board to the vast majority of diseases. So we can talk about those numbers a little bit. And I don't think this will be a surprise to anybody. The increase, I can't say with certainty whether some groups are increasing in terms of newer infections more than others.
Okay.
That said, the baseline was clearly not equitable. So we have data prior to the pandemic.
Can I ask you one favor?
Yeah.
Break down baseline not equitable in layman's terms. I know what you mean, but say that in plain, like you was talking to a group of teens at I don't know, Boston High School or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, in simple terms, there's some groups that are getting hit by this much harder than others, for reasons that we can go into shortly. I can give you some numbers just to kind of put things into perspective. So for these common infections that we just talked about, even before the pandemic, we know that people who identify as Black tend to be affected more than people who identify as American Indian, Alaskan Native, followed by people who identify as Hispanic, followed by people who identify as white. And then you can start layering other kind of vulnerable identities on top of that. So in an extreme case, and this is a statistic that just like really like breaks my heart, like with HIV in specific, if you look at the prevalence of HIV amongst transgender communities, it's based on a recent survey, it's 17% compared to like a national prevalence of 0.3%. That's crazy. And then if you start to look amongst like transgender transgender women, if you start to break that down by race ethnicity, the
Mhm.
prevalence of HIV amongst Black transgender women is about 60%, which is just absolutely mind blowing to me and totally unacceptable. Um, and so, these sexually transmitted infections, in the same way that, COVID showed us, they're infections that basically fall across like lines of vulnerability. Um, so
I think it's important because I said to you in sort of our pregame before we went live that you don't, and I'm going to ask you a question,
mhm,
and I'm going to preface this with this is not any philosophical value sort of statement or question, but we don't hear a lot of as much education. I am not aware, nor do I observe as much sexual health education that I used to see as when I was a youth worker, when I was a teen. And
mhm.
so let's get a little bit into the conversation because we want to cover prevention and treatment as well, and then talk about prep and what it does and what it doesn't do. Um, but what it is abstinence still a thing?
Yeah, it's yeah. So yeah, I think we it's a great question, Jimmy. We kind of have to. So I mean, let's talk about the toolkit, right? Because it it's never kind of like, oh, I do this one thing and I'll be perfectly protected, and if I don't, I won't be. So let's walk through
Options.
there's a toolkit, and people can choose, right? Because the goal here isn't to, like, tell people you can and can't do this.
That's
It's
right.
like, it's like we want to me, like, sexual health is like an integral part of, like, a happy, healthy life. And it's about, like, okay, what tools can we offer people to support them with doing that in a way that's healthy. So, abstinence, like, is it's a surefire way of not getting a sexually transmitted infection. I
Because
mean,
you're not doing anything.
if you're not having sex, you're probably not going to get a sexually transmitted infection. For some people, that works, and that's a valid option. Um, Condoms, right?
Yes.
Um, they'll protect you against the vast majority of sexually transmitted infections. They prevent pregnancy, which is, for people who are trying to avoid pregnancy, and added value.
If
And
used properly, I remember this from being a youth health educator. If used properly, we used to take out, you know, the
yeah,
the the vegetable Jill Scott example.
yeah.
We used to show them how to do it.
Yeah. You'd be surprised. So definitely, so that, that works. Just like, you know, minimizing, like, the number of partners can, mathematically decrease your risk. And then there are certain sexually transmitted infections where we actually have vaccines for, right? So HPV, human
Yep.
papillomavirus,
Yep.
there's a vaccine for that one, which, like, everybody should be talking to their doctor about. Hepatitis B, most people get vaccinated when they're young, but if you're not, there's a vaccine that'll protect you against that. So that's part of the toolkit also. And then, you mentioned PrEP.
Yes.
PrEP is like a super interesting one that we can talk about, for a very long time.
I think we should because there is this sort of thing, and I here and there pop on a dating app just or whatever, and you see this stuff of on prep, on prep, on prep, on prep. And I think that what I'll let you be the professional, but by my observation, I'm not sure. All right, let me set some context. You said this sort of a little bit that sort of HIV and AIDS is the quote unquote big one. And I think with the great thing of the prevention of prep, without the proper education, people might just think, by my observation, people might just think that popping that pill, they're good and straight, period. But I'll let you explain sort of about PrEP and what it does. But I just knowing what I see and just even, hearing, conversation among young people, it's just, and I wonder if that's why the STDs may be going up because people are, I'm sorry, it's just a very interesting topic for me.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. And I before I dive into detail, I will say probably the best preventative measure is like a direct line to your doctor, right? Because so much of this is information and education and having somebody on your team that you can turn to when like things don't go as expected, or when you want to like do something and want to make sure you're doing it safely. So yeah, I think if there's like one takeaway from all of this is like you're as people are going through their healthy sexual lives, like having a physician on your team that can support you with all of this is critical. And for some folks, prep is an option.
Yes, sir.
And if you think you may benefit from that, you should call your doctor so that they can help you walk through that decision. And let's talk about prep.
Oh,
So just PrEP. So it stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. So that's a fancy term for the following. So prophylaxis is like an action that you take to prevent a disease. So this is an action that you're taking to prevent a disease before you get exposed to it. And this particular disease that we're talking about happens to be HIV. So I think that's lesson number one, that folks need to be aware of. PrEP prevents HIV, but it doesn't really protect you against any other sexually transmitted infection.
can you say it again for the people in the back?
Yeah, PrEP prevents HIV. It does not protect you against any other sexually transmitted infection. And so obviously, like, we really care about HIV because once you get HIV, we unfortunately can't cure it. And so it becomes a lifelong disease. But if you're on PrEP, you're still at risk for gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, all the others, you name it. To prevent those, you need what we call barrier contraception, which is a fancy term for a condom or similar. And so what is PrEP specifically? It's basically a medicine that you take to prevent HIV. There are a couple of different kinds. There are two pills that you take, and just recently they actually just approved an injection that you take every 2 months, that works. In order to start PrEP, you need to talk to your doctor. They'll ask you some questions to basically get a sense of your level of risk for HIV. They'll do a lot of counseling. They get some blood tests to make sure that your kidneys are okay, just to make sure that it's safe for you to take this medicine. They make sure that you don't already have HIV, because if you do, it changes things. And then basically you have visits every few months to make sure that things are going well, to make sure that you're not having side effects and whatnot. And we know that if you're on PrEP, it's incredibly effective at preventing HIV if you take it consistently.
Exactly. Just like proper use of condoms and taking all other meds that the way you should. Yep.
Definitely. I mean, if you're taking it once a day and missing like 4 or 5 days, then we're not getting very far there. And so that's essentially how PrEP works. It's highly effective. We definitely need to get more people on it. It's vastly underused. But again, it doesn't protect against many other STIs.
Okay. we're getting ready, if it's okay with you. If we covered prevention, we covered the big three with the HIV and AIDS, and let's go a little bit into you kind of covered treatment, but there's a lot of great questions coming in, and I want to leave room for that. Usually we go till about 10. We're going to go till about 8:45, 8:50 today.
Yep.
And so let's talk about treatment, because in I don't want to say in scenarios where people were not aware, due to impact of disparities and everything that comes with trying to be a patient in a system and structure that is very interesting for folks that look like you and I, they may have to go into treatment stage. And so however you want to go from, let's maybe start with the big three and then end with, because you mentioned that HIV is sort of a lifelong, what some would classify as chronic, but it is, a diagnosis of HIV isn't what it was 20 some odd years ago. And so let's maybe start with the big three with treatment and then end with HIV, and then we'll take some questions.
Yeah, awesome, love it. Yeah, so I think big point number one is like especially true with HIV, but definitely the case with a lot of the other STIs. We've come an incredibly long way from several decades ago, and we have like awesome treatments for a lot of these conditions. And so again, the threshold to call your doctor if you're worried should be zero. Like,
as soon as you think that, let's just keep it 100. It's Twitch.
Yeah. Yeah. Pick up the phone. Like, it's a quick visit. Testing is pretty easy. Testing nowadays is usually done, of course, again, many different infections. So it's a little bit different for each one, but for most of them, it's a urine test or a swab. For a few, it's a blood test. The results come back pretty quickly. And so you'll know. And if you know, you can take action and get treated. And so the treatment, again, varies depending on the infection, but they're also pretty straightforward. So, for example, for gonorrhea, it's a shot of an antibiotic called ceftriaxone. For syphilis, if syphilis is advanced, it can be a little bit complicated. But for early, simple syphilis, it's literally just a couple of shots of penicillin. Highly effective. For chlamydia, it's, a pill. Some of them you just have to take one pill. Others you take a pill for 7 days. Also highly effective. Almost all these treatments are super well tolerated, and then you're done. You're treated, and you don't have it. The other thing to be aware of is that we always recommend getting partners treated as well, right? Just
not only treated, you got they can't get into treatment unless you notify them.
Yeah, totally.
So that that's another whole show, and that's after dark, because
and there, again, this is why you should talk to your doctor, because there are ways of, obviously, there are ways to do this in a way
have
that
DPH. You give them their phone number, and DPH will just say one. Now, if you told them that you're in a committed relationship and they get a call from DPH about one of your partners, they're gonna be like, but in all seriousness, it is important that
totally. Yeah, and it's important for their health. Also, if it's a partner that you're gonna continue having relationships with, then you can, if you don't treat your partner, you're probably gonna get reinfected again. So that's gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis. HIV is a little bit different because of the reasons that you mentioned. We unfortunately don't have a cure yet, and so it is a lifelong illness. But I think the key takeaway messages here. So, I was too young in the 90s to have lived through this. But
watch it. Go ahead.
Yeah, true. But yeah, I've heard the stories, and HIV there was a time where we had no meds, or it was a death sentence.
Yep.
Now, it is as simple for most people. It's as simple as taking one pill every day. That's it. And these medications are so effective that we are starting to see life expectancy for people with HIV be essentially the same as people without HIV. We are very comfortable saying that people die with HIV as opposed to from HIV.
Mhm.
Yeah. Nobody should ever die from HIV in the year 2023. Our treatment is that effective. So that's key point number one. You can live a totally normal long life if you have HIV and are in treatment. The other reason why it's pretty important to get plugged in is because we also have this like really great data now that basically shows that if you're taking your medications every single day and you're something we call the viral load, which is the
Yeah.
amount of virus in the blood.
Yep.
We have tests that can measure it. You have 500 copies or you have 1,000,000 copies. The amount of virus in the blood. If you take your meds, we can get that down to what we call undetectable.
Yep. Which is under it's either under 200 or 20. I'm sort of photographic.
No, you're all over this, Jimmy. So it used to be 200. The newer tests are 20 now. So you're right on.
It's been a while. It's been a while since I was a health educator. So okay.
Yeah. And so the amazing thing, and this is really quite revolutionary, and I'm just amazed every time I think about this. But if your viral load is undetectable, we say that you are untransmissible, meaning that if you have HIV and you are on meds and your viral load is undetectable, you cannot transmit it to somebody else.
And let's just also add, and and it's so interesting because, and there's a couple of comments and questions we're going to get, but if you're someone who's HIV positive and you use condoms, and if your partner or partners are aware and they're on, so you talked about tools. It sounds interesting in this time where, sort of Salt and Pepper used to say, it's your thing. Do what you want to do. You want to do what you want to do. And in this time of sexual freedom, but still be healthy.
Totally.
And so there are multiple tools that, oh God, I was going to say something. Jesus. All right. It might be a good time to transition to the question, because this is a sponsored and it's not after dark. So, but there's some things that you can say that will really drive the point home.
I love it.
Let's go into a couple of comments. This is, again, I appreciate these folks being in the room. And actually, I think with their platform, it's just important that folks get this information. But he said I should have had a for this convo. But let's go to the questions. Oh God, my mother's in here. A lot of seniors fool around in the
Hey, listen, they can benefit from this too, let me tell you.
Okay. Oh, Jesus. Somebody said that you look like you started practicing medicine when you were 3. All right, let's get into some serious comments here. Dr. Matthias started practice. Oh, that's okay. Here we go. I live in Randolph, and I remember when childhood neighborhood friend lost both her parents to AIDS. Dad was having an affair and passed it on to the mom. That's, something as well. And I'm going to jump a little bit, but my aunt made a comment here and it's so interesting because the term DL, and I believe at one point there was some interesting numbers around women of color, that there were numbers rising. One of the reasons that some people were propagating that the men weren't comfortable sharing their, sexuality with their partner, and that whole DL factor thing. And so here it is. The info is vital, especially for those who are still on the DL. And so that is any response there, sir, before I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, it's really unfortunate. I think that the HIV and most STIs, there's really a lot of stigma that surrounds this.
Yep.
And that, the treatments have changed drastically. And yet you know, with the stigma, we've come a long way, but it's just the progress has been much more sluggish. I mean, I still meet patients who have, you know, newly diagnosed with HIV who think that they're gonna die soon, and I'm like, oh, you know, like you're gonna live a totally normal life. So
Yeah.
I think definitely we have a ways to go in addressing that stigma and kind of normalizing this a little bit. Like, you know, to me, having HIV is no different than having diabetes, right? It just means you're gonna, you know, you're gonna have a doctor that you need to check it in with every 6 months or so.
I just wanted to name as we're getting into some of the comments and questions. And this is a valid one, and I'll get me if I'm wrong.
Hmm.
HIV is a copy type, a replicating sort of virus. It gets into the nucleus and it changes a little bit of the format of the nucleus and replicates itself in a manner that the body can't attack it like other diseases. Correct?
I love it.
And then, so
I'm
with
on you. I'm not
no, no,
needing
no, 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 no.
it.
You get to undetectable, it means that the amount of replication is either masked or it decreased. The medicines, that's where you jump in, sir.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. It means that the amount of replicate, so it's exactly as you're saying, like a HIV gets actually like into our nucleus, it gets into like the DNA and kind of uses the machinery of our cells to replicate.
Okay.
And so undetectable just means that the replication is so low that we can't detect it in the bloodstream. And we know that when that happens, you can't transmit it. Unfortunately, it still means that it's kind of hidden in our cells in the DNA. And there's a lot of really smart people all over the world who are thinking about how we get it, how we get rid of it there, because if we could do that, we could cure it. But we're unfortunately not there yet.
Absolutely. There were a couple of questions. There's so many. That was Auntie Java's especially important. Just looking for question mark. Are there side effects of PrEP? You mentioned that they would check the kidneys. And so
Yeah.
are there any side effects that you're aware of PrEP? And then maybe also, because I remember when I would do sort of sometimes they would have me tell the teen, hey, we got your test results back. And then the nurse practitioner would come in. Sometimes they'd go take a pill or whatever, but then they'd come back and some of these pills are very powerful. And so what are there any side effects to PrEP and maybe the other meds? And we can get ready to wrap up from there. I'll see if there are any more. There are probably a few more questions, but
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, a lot of the blood tests, especially the kidney tests, are to help decide which one to use. There's one pill that doesn't jive well in folks that have kidney issues, so we would just use a different one.
okay.
But you know, the side effects, every medication has side effects, unfortunately. These meds thankfully don't have that many, and the vast majority of people tolerate them really quite well. When you do see side effects, it's things like, you know, nausea, like stomach upset, things like that. And so this is why when you start, you kind of keep a close eye on it. And if you're starting to get any of those symptoms, you tell your doctor and we can switch to something that's a little bit different. We've got options, thankfully. And there are definitely more that will be coming down the pipeline in the next several years.
It's interesting, and I know this is an interesting statement from Charlotte. Not a lot of emphasis on prevention and education, a lot of information about pills and treatment. Who's driving that? Think about it. And so I think that sort of balance with sometimes, you know, I just want to in this space we used to talk about harm reduction as a model. You know, if you got multiple partners, use condoms with everyone. That was sort of just a small example. But it is just very interesting as you named disparities and awareness of information like this. And when you broke that, because we've held space here for trans men and trans women, and that's one thing that I'm very intentional about, because the more depending on the amount of the marginalized groups that you are a part of, increases all type of risk.
Totally.
I'm not going to say don't be black, but if you're a woman, trans woman, in a food desert, bruh.
Yeah.
So well, Fredo, I really okay. That's this was good because now I'm thinking about Fredo. We would definitely love to have you back at some point and maybe further this conversation and go a little bit deep. I would love to have you be a part of an After Dark. After Dark is sort of not Monday through Thursday at 9. We can have some real where you're comfortable. We can have some real,
It's the espresso martini conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. But no, I really appreciate you taking the time and spending with the audience today. I'm just making sure we didn't miss any vital. Here's another one. Did you notice any uptick in HIV, or I'll add other STIs in the pandemic? Well, when people were getting back into screening and care and treatment.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head. It takes a little bit of time for this data to come out. Usually there's a delay of about like a year or two. But it'll be really interesting to see, and I wouldn't be surprised if it has gone up. Specifically also because, you know, these epidemics intersect across all you know, so yeah. But yeah, Jimmy, this was incredible, and
I got
love
one quick more
yeah,
before you
go
go.
for it.
She asked me to ask it, and I think this is important. Dr. Matthias, is it your take on HPV vaccine for Black and brown young women and men? There's been so much said about it having possible negative lasting effects on young Black and brown people. The commercials were clearly targeting a specific genre, but the commercials have also, and I mean, some of these observations, and when you think about it, it's real. Remember HPV. You would see the vaccine a little. I want to protect my son, and you know they go back from him from 40 being diagnosed, so he could have got the vaccine at 12. And so that piece. Are you aware of any major concerns or disproportionate impact on Black and brown young people getting the HPV vaccine?
Yeah, not to my knowledge.
Okay.
You know, and obviously, you know, there's a lot of people looking at the long-term data, but everything that we have so far has shown that it's a pretty effective vaccine overall. And you know, I think a lot of the commercials, you know, targeting specific groups are, you know, to kind of address the issue of these disparities, right? Like, you know, certain Black or brown communities like have lower vaccination rates and things like that. And so I think you know, I think we should be tapping into some of these things more than we are.
Ooh, this may not have to do with sexual, but your ID doc. I'm in some conversation of another space
Mhm.
with a pharma company to talk about. There was a lot of concern. You said vaccine and
Mm.
us taking advantage of, and so I think there's a balance of Charlotte's concern, but then
Yeah.
also the intentionality of in these communities because we talk about lack of awareness and information. But just a little bit of your take in the importance of people with our varying amount of melanin and our makeup participating in vaccine studies, because we found that with the COVID vaccine, that there weren't enough of us, Black and brown, participating in the study to make sure that, you know, the vaccine didn't wrongly interact with anything that's, you know, in our DNA and stuff. So can you give a little bit of take on that if you have one?
Yeah, for sure. And oh man, yeah, you're right. This could be a whole 45-minute
In itself.
yeah, because you know, it's tough, and this is something that I worry about, So, you know, the medical mistrust um is something that is grounded on a lot of very negative things that have happened in the past, right? Like Tuskegee happened, um, really awful things that have happened. And so it is totally like, of course, this exists because there are things that have been done to us that were like absolutely wrong. Um, that said, there's also kind of the flip side of this, which is I also worry when too much mistrust basically doesn't allow us to benefit from things that are actually like good for us, and
Yep.
it's kind of all this double-edged thing where you have to, and this is, there's no perfect solution to this, but I think in engaging and keeping the conversation going just is critical, because we have to kind of strike that right balance between getting the information that we need, while at the same time not missing out on things that are truly beneficial to us. And so, I think that this kind of touches on the trials as well, because if people that look like us don't participate in trials, then we won't know what the benefits or maybe even the harms to us.
That's the point that was sir. That's the point that was Irving Goldston earlier on. We lost her, I believe, in late 2020. And that's what she was talking about, that we wouldn't participate in the trials and we wouldn't find out if there were adverse effects on Black and brown folks until it was produced and out there. And then, all of a sudden, which then further alienates us, because it's like, and so that's a whole, I'm stuttering, so that I'll be reaching out to you again. I can talk. But Wilfredo, thank you for all the information around sexual health and STIs, but then also just that little bit of insurance. And let's just name the fact, we got people like you in medicine now. We have a Black woman that was centered. She's up at Chan now, I believe, one of the leaders in the vaccine. And so listen. All right, sir. Here goes one of those moments that Dr. Labrie talks about. He knows I'm about to get in full host activist mode. But I appreciate you so much, sir. We're here. If anything comes out, some public health, something or whatever that you need to say, hey, Jimmy, we're noticing, just post this and get it out. We are available to support that and help get the word out, sir.
Yeah. Thanks, Jimmy. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we're here. We're in Boston, and we're ready to take care of y'all. So just reach out.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Wilfredo, thank you so much, sir.
Take care, guys. Bye.
Whoa. That it went the way I kind of thought it would, but we hit on some good points. Just a couple of things, you all, because I got to get out of here. Hop on Java with Jimmy around 12 o'clock. I'm about to head out to a meeting, workshop meeting with the mayor's office, and then there's a presser at 12 noon. We got some things coming down the pipe to help our community, and so we're at the final stages of getting ready to announce that. And so but I just wanted to mention to you all that tomorrow morning, speaking of the mayor, it's We Need to Know Wednesdays with Wu. And also we're going to be joined in the beginning with Jack Fleming, who is the new CEO at the Boston Athletic Association, most known for their sponsorship organization and leading the Boston Marathon that is taking place, I believe, on the 17th. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the marathon, as well as sort of tap into this concept of One Boston Day. I've talked to both of them and mentioned that there is some sentiment about whether there's one Boston or two. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. The mayor will talk about some of the things she's announcing today and get us updated on some other things as well. And then on Thursday morning, it's sort of continuing. We'll call Wednesday and Thursday our marathon days, even though we're about a week and a half out. We're going to talk with a representative from Black Girls Run, and also have another guest from the Boston Athletic Association, Suzanne Jones Walmsley. And I didn't mention Rochelle's name, who Rochelle, you all know, is a part of the Java fam. And so they're coming in on Thursday to actually talk about some of the partnership and investment that BAA makes in Black and brown communities around health and running. And so that is our program for tomorrow and Thursday. I hope you guys will join us. Thank you for tuning in today. Listen, y'all, well, I won't say tag, because if you tag somebody in this episode, you might get a text or inbox talk about, why are you tagging me? So make sure, Charlotte, or 3 or 4. You know what? I'm not messing with you all. Charlotte said you could have kept going for. That's the thing. Y'all just pray for this space and the availability to get people, because this would have been a different conversation face to face. So I want live audience and all that, so y'all can stand up and I run out in the audience and ask the questions. Anyway, let me get off of here. Naraki, good to see you. Hoodies are coming back in the fall. We got some other merch on the way. I had a conversation with Miss Teresa yesterday, and so we're going to talk. We're talking about getting some stuff ready for the summer. I am going to look into t-shirts and stuff for the summer, so it's coming. Y'all just pray that the right support comes, and for me to be able to hire someone that can really just jump in and do everything. Tay handles the schedule. Rachel nudges me on other stuff, and I really now need a dedicated, like at least part-time, that they're doing nothing but Java with Jimmy and their family. So we can get stuff together more. All right, that's a little bit okay. We're not going to get into the vegetables. I have to get out of here. And we'll see you guys tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. With Mayor Wu and Jack Fleming from Boston Athletic Association. See how y'all be getting me in trouble. Y'all have a wonderful day.